Welcome back to the FAQ Shack. Today, we are diving deep into a part of Irish history that's so often left in the shadows. We're talking about the Hidden Army, the women of the Provisional Irish Republican Army. So, let's just ask the question right out of the gate. What was the real deal with women in the IRA? Were they just supporters in the background, the wives and mothers, as the common story often goes? Or were they something more? Were they soldiers, bombers, strategists? Well, we're going to get into it because the truth is a whole lot more complex and, frankly, a lot more fascinating than the stereotypes would have you believe. I mean, just take a look at this mural from the streets of Belfast. That is not a picture of women standing on the sidelines. It shows armed women, part of a long, long history of female militancy in Irish republicanism. This one image just completely shatters that idea of women as passive supporters. It tells you a story of active and, often violent involvement that stretches back more than 100 years. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the historical foundation, what we're calling the steel backbone. Then, we're going to meet some of the most well-known volunteers and bombers. After that, we'll dig into the absolutely brutal struggle of Armagh's dirty protest, try to untangle the clash between nationalism and feminism, and finally, we'll follow their unbelievable journey from prison to parliament. First up, the steel backbone. Because this story, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere during the Troubles. No, the roots of women's involvement in republicanism go way back, right to the revolutionary days of the early 20th century. And the key organization you have to know about is Cumann mBan, the Women's League, which was founded all the way back in 1914. Now, on paper, they were a support group, an auxiliary to the male Irish volunteers, but their actual purpose, it went way beyond making tea. Their constitution was all about advancing Irish liberty, and that meant teaching members everything from first aid and drill to, yes, even rifle practice. They were building a nationwide network, a real infrastructure for the movement. And listen, don't just take my word for how important they were. This quote right here is from an IRA commandant during the War of Independence. He said flat out that the guerrilla flying columns, the absolute core of the IRA's campaign, would have collapsed without Cumann and mBan. That's not a supporting role. That's fundamental. That's indispensable. Okay, let's jump forward to the Troubles. This is where that historical foundation gets built upon in a really big way. The Provisional IRA, the PIRA, starts integrating women directly into its ranks as volunteers, not just as a separate support group. And why? Well, it was a purely tactical decision. A woman could often move around a city, get through a checkpoint with way less suspicion from the British Army than a young man could. It got so official that a 1977 IRA report actually said, quote, "Women and girls have greater roles to play as military activists." So the shift from support to the front line was now official strategy. And this new strategy, it brings us to the individuals. It's time to put some faces to this fight and look at the pretty staggering stories of the women who became central to the armed struggle. So, meet Dolores and Marion Price. They were sisters, born into a really well-known Republican family. For them, joining the cause wasn't just a choice. It was almost a birthright. They became members of a top-secret PRA unit, and their commitment would take them from the streets of Belfast to the heart of London and into a brutal, brutal confrontation with the British state. And their ordeal, which you can see on this timeline, it's mind-blowing. In '73, they're convicted for the Old Bailey bombing in London, an attack that injured hundreds. In prison, they start a hunger strike that lasts for 203 days. And the authorities' response? For 167 of those days, they were force-fed, a horrific, violent process that they later compared to rape. The trauma, both physical and psychological, was so severe it led to lifelong health problems, and it's why they were eventually released early. Now, while the Price sisters came from a deep, deep Republican background, the IRA also attracted people from, well, the most unlikely places you could possibly imagine. Which brings us to the story of an English debutante who became one of the IRA's master bomb makers. Yeah, this is the story of Rose Dugdale. She was born into the English aristocracy, educated at Oxford, and she gave up a life of unbelievable privilege to throw in with the IRA. Her career as a volunteer was just audacious. I mean, she hijacked a helicopter to try and bomb an RUC station. She masterminded this huge art heist, stealing millions of pounds worth of paintings to try and ransom them for the Price sisters. And even after she was imprisoned, she became a key strategist, developing new and better explosives. Her transformation was just total. The experience of being in prison was so central to the stories of these women, which brings us to our next chapter. The unique and incredibly grim struggle that took place inside Armagh Gaol. So, to really get what happens next, you have to understand this one crucial term: special category status. It basically meant paramilitary prisoners were treated as political prisoners, as prisoners of war, not as ordinary criminals. When the British government got rid of this status in 1976, it was a massive deal. It was seen as a direct attempt to criminalize the entire Republican struggle, and that decision is what sparked years of harrowing protests inside the prisons. In response, the prisoners started what became known as the Dirty Protest. And this quote, it comes from a letter that was smuggled out of Armagh, and it gives you a raw sense of what it was like. After being denied access to toilets, the women just refused to wash or clean their cells. They started smearing their own excrement on the walls. The conditions were, by every single account, beyond horrific. But what happened in the women's prison in Armagh had a whole other dimension to it that the men's protests in the Longcash prison just didn't. It became this uniquely gendered struggle, using the female body itself as a site of political resistance. And this quote just gets to the heart of it. As a form of control, the prison authorities started denying the women's sanitary products. So their response was to smear their own menstrual blood on the cell walls, right alongside the excrement. This act was profoundly shocking to the authorities, to the public, even to some people inside the Republican movement. It was a defiant, deeply gendered statement that their own biology would not be used as a weapon to break them. And that intense, brutal experience inside the prisons, it helped create a whole new kind of political awareness. It forced a really difficult conversation inside the Republican movement about the clash between two big ideas: nationalism and feminism. At its heart, the tension was pretty simple. For traditional republicanism, the number one overarching goal was national liberation, a united Ireland. Everything else came second. But for feminism, the liberation of women was its own priority, separate from the national struggle. For a long time, these two things were in conflict, with most female volunteers saying the national cause had to come first, period. But out of that conflict, something new started to grow: Republican feminism. Driven by what they went through in prison, women started to organize politically. In the 1980s, the Sinn Féin Women's Department was formed, and they started pushing for rights on things like divorce and contraception, which were hugely controversial issues in a very conservative Catholic community. Their argument was powerful and new. You can't have true national liberation if women aren't liberated as part of that same struggle. And this internal political fight really set the stage for our final chapter: the absolutely remarkable transformation of Republican women from soldiers and prisoners to the very highest levels of political power on the island of Ireland. And this table right here, it just shows you the result of that long journey. After the Good Friday Agreement, when the focus shifted from armed struggle to politics, things changed fast. By 2018, Mary Lou McDonald is president of Sinn Féin, and just this year, 2024, Michelle O'Neill became the first minister of Northern Ireland. For a movement that once had women in a separate auxiliary group to now have its top leaders, North and South, both be women, that is a profound seismic shift. But that political success hasn't come without some internal debate. Some of the veteran women from the 80s, the ones who really started that feminist fight within the movement, they feel that in the push to become a mainstream political party, maybe that radical edge of their original struggle has been softened a bit, blunted in the hunt for votes. So when you look at it all, the journey from the filth and protest of a cell in Armagh, Gaul, to the power and prestige of the First Minister's office, it is one of the most incredible political stories in modern history. And it really makes you wonder, what does this whole journey reveal about the nature of struggle, of sacrifice, and of revolution itself? It's a huge question, and I'd really love to hear what you all think. Let us know your take in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in to the FAQ Shack.